I think we need to go back and actually look about how churches are facing evangelism today. I think that's a key question. And what I would say is the reality in so many countries is that actually going to church is no longer socially acceptable. So that we need to understand from church just how alien church looks to people outside of church. Let me tell you a story about an Australian who has been converted through actually looking at John's Gospel through the word one-to-one, which is where I spend my time now. He'd spent 6 months with a Christian going through John's Gospel in a socially acceptable and accessible format. But here's how he described church before he actually was converted. He said, "My Christian friend wanted me to go to a building where the only person I knew was him. When I went in the door, they sang, and they sang 6 times. And I didn't understand one thing they were saying in their songs. And then he thought I would not be embarrassed when you made some poor person stand up and read out loud." He said, "Whoever reads out loud, that must be so embarrassing for the person reading out the gospel out loud. So embarrassing." And then he did this. He said, "And you're having a laugh if you think I'm going to sit and listen to a monologue for 30 minutes. Completely an alien world." Now, because he had had a friend who had spent 6 months going through the Gospel of John with him and had loved him, and he recognized that that person had loved him in that process, his friend Steve, the Christian, had become living church to that man. That meant when he invited him to go to his church, his thought as a non-Christian, well, actually, if there are more people like Steve who's loved me at this building, well, that's perhaps not a bad idea. And then when they started to sing songs of worship, he said to me, he said, "Look, I didn't know the tunes, but I read the words and I could begin to understand why Christians would want to worship Jesus, because I'd got to understand who Jesus was through the gospel." And then when someone stood up to read out loud, I wasn't concentrating on their embarrassment. I was interested to hear another section of the gospel. So actually, I was interested in what was being read out loud. And then when it came to the preacher, well, my friend Steve, the Christian, is just a gospel sharer. And here standing up in the pulpit was a man who was clearly a Bible teacher. So actually, I sat back and thought, good, I'm going to learn a lot from this. Do you see what had happened? The Christian had become living church, and he bridged this gap between an alien world, which is what church looks like to so many people, particularly under 40, and the fact that actually his Christian friend Steve had loved him and shown him what it meant to have a living faith with Christ. Complete revelation. Now, in contrast to that, sadly, so many churches represent in so many countries where Christians run away from a world which now says that they're socially unacceptable. So that Christianity is viewed as unacceptable. So we should not be surprised that actually going to church is a completely alien experience. And we need to think for our evangelism about what we're doing outside the church, not how we try and bring people into this alien world to try and evangelize them. And one of the sad realities for my job now as I go around the world introducing the word one-to-one is I meet so many churches who are preaching to people stuck in the church, and they're not preaching to non-Christians.